to Dr. Bean from the Pediatrics Department at Meharry Medical College, and she's discussing some of the issues that impact upon children in the Department of Pediatrics. And of course, Dr. Bean, as we promised during the end of the first segment, that we'd give you an opportunity to perhaps talk about some children's diseases and some of the things dealing with children and pediatrics at Meharry Medical College.
Well, as chair of the Department of Pediatrics at Meharry Medical College, I'm also in charge of the general pediatric as well as the nursery at Nashville General. And so we see children all the way from 0 to 21. By the way, I figured I might as well pronounce my name for those of you who see it on the graphics but don't know how to pronounce it. It's Excelina.
Excelina.
My mother named me that. That's the way it is. Okay. And so you just remember to pronounce the X. So if you're trying to find or need a pediatrician and you specifically want Dr. Bean, then it's Dr. Excelina Bean.
Very good.
We start with this issue of the problems of children, and most people don't think of children as having a lot of problems, but many people don't realize that Tennessee, for example, rates number 47 in terms of infant mortality relative to the country as a whole. And that's a really bad statistic. There are very few states who have worse infant mortality rates than we do. So that means that the problem of children in this state start at birth, or in this case start even before they are born. And there is a whole set of programs which, many of which are coming out of the county in the state of Tennessee that are beginning to address those particular issues of infant mortality. Then we have to address issues related to prevention of childhood diseases. One of the big issues in pediatrics is that we're into prevention. So a lot of what we do is preventive services, and that means, for example, immunizations. And so we focus a great deal on making sure that immunizations are optimal. And there are a whole bunch of new immunizations that many parents don't realize, such as hepatitis A, which is relatively new, second chickenpox vaccine. So many people, many parents who think that children are adequately immunized really not have optimal immunizations and should be making sure that they understand all of the childhood diseases. Now, as a pediatrician, I get involved not only in chronic disease, but also in how children grow and develop. So we get involved in developmental problems. We look at school issues. We look at learning disabilities, not just problem learning such as ADHD and ADD and attention deficit disorder and those kind of issues, which we've heard a lot of in the news, but also just assuring that children have an optimal chance of growing. We also get growing and development optimally. We also get involved, of course, with chronic diseases, and chronic diseases in a community such as ours, in which are things such as asthma, diabetes, hypertension, adolescent pregnancies, just the and then we have the routine, ordinary problems that we deal with on a regular basis, such as otitis media and ear infections and pneumonias. And so we deal with all of those issues. And again, I emphasize that one of the unique aspects of pediatrics is that we actually focus a lot of attention on preventing those particular diseases. For example, making sure that kids get flu shots.
And so all of these things play into what you do at Meharry, dealing with children. Of course, you classify those from almost from birth up to as late as 21 years of age, 24 years of age, I think you mentioned. Now, one of the big issues that we have to deal with, I think, Dr. Bean, is this whole issue that we've made quite recently, and I think one of the things that encouraged us to have you here, and that was this whole issue of childhood obesity. Let's speak to that from the position that some of the things that you said in reference to that, but at the same time to perhaps give us some information relative to what we might be able to do to really combat this. And let's take as much of this segment as we possibly can, as well as the last part of this particular show.
Well, you know, we can talk about childhood obesity in terms of prevention and also in terms of treatment. So I thought initially what we might want to do is just talk about prevention. Prevention is generally classified as primary prevention, keeping children from becoming obese. Secondary prevention, trying to minimize the, when they become obese, trying to minimize the complications of them being obese, and also trying to address helping them to not be obese and treating them. And finally, addressing when they are obese and they get the complications associated with obesity, how do we minimize the complications? So in terms of primary prevention, the main issues are you become obese because you take too many calories in, or you take in too much energy in the form of food, and you don't use it up adequately. So what that means, we eat too many foods that are high in calorie and not the right kind of calories that your body actually needs and can optimally utilize, and we don't exercise enough. And for children, that means inadequate physical activity. And as you know, there have been a lot of changes which have contributed to that inadequate physical activity. Something as simple, which doesn't seem to be very simple, because it's important for children to learn to read. But very often, in exchange for giving them more time in the classroom with what we considered hard subjects like reading and math and stuff, we took it away from them being able to get outside and exercise. So we never thought, 20 years ago, we never thought of childhood obesity because most children were utilizing all of the energy that they could by running and being children and by exercising. Now, gym has become almost another class. So you get a certain number of credits in the course of the time you're in school, but we no longer have that issue of children being able to just be out and play as part of school. In addition to that, we live in communities very often, especially in communities that I work in which it is often not necessarily safe for children just to be out on the street. So when I grew up in Winchester, Tennessee, I mean, we were out there in the streets all the time. The whole neighborhood was our parent. They watched us, but we were basically in the streets, in the fields, etc. Well, that no longer occurs. Children are inside. It's not safe for them to be on the streets. Their families don't feel it's safe. So they're inside the house, they're watching TV, they're playing video games, and they are not exercising. So as a result of that, and they also, families work. Both parents work. So children often find that their main source of energy or their main sources of food are fast foods, foods that they can make themselves by putting in the microwave. You've seen those commercials. Or it's foods in which they have to stop up at the local McDonald's on the way home and pick up their dinner. Or the parent does, because they have so little time to do the kind of making dinner and sitting down that we used to do. So that all of those have contributed to the fact that we have an almost epidemic of childhood obesity.
It seems that there's almost a conspiracy of events in a real sense. Nobody actually planned any of this, but all of those things taken together, it does make it quite difficult for children to become involved in exercise and other kinds of programs. And of course, we'll be back with our audience following this very, very short commercial break. We're talking to Dr. Bean.